three of the most powerful nations on Earth, the United States, Israel, and Iran, are locked in a war that most people don't fully understand. Sanctions, proxy battles, assassinations, nuclear threats. For decades, the plan was simple: isolate Iran, crush its economy, and watch the regime collapse from within. But here's what nobody expected. It didn't work. And now, in 2026, Iran is not just surviving, it is reshaping the entire Middle East on its own terms. So what went wrong? And why are both Washington and Tel Aviv more stressed today than they have ever been? Stay with me, because what you are about to discover will completely change how you see this conflict. To understand the present, you have to go back to 1979, the year everything changed. When Iran's Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah, America's most trusted ally in the Middle East, Washington lost something it thought it would never lose. Control. The next 4 decades became a masterclass in pressure. The United States imposed wave after wave of crippling sanctions. Iran was cut off from global banking. Oil exports were choked. The currency collapsed. By 2018, when President Trump reimposed maximum pressure sanctions, Iran's economy shrank by nearly 15% in a single year. The calculation in Washington was crystal clear: a population under economic pain would eventually rise up, and the regime would fall. But here is where the story takes a turn that no analyst fully predicted. Because while the pressure was building outside, Iran was quietly building something else, entirely from within. Facing total isolation, Iran made a decision that would redefine Middle Eastern geopolitics forever. Instead of fighting alone, it built an empire of allies. They called it the Axis of Resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, arguably the most sophisticated non-state military force on the planet, trained, funded, and armed directly by Tehran. The Houthis in Yemen, who by 2024 were firing missiles and drones at commercial shipping lanes, grinding Red Sea trade to a near halt, and costing the global economy billions of dollars. Iraqi militias operating freely across borders. Syrian territory converted into a highway for Iranian weapons moving westward. And then Gaza, where the October 7th attack shocked the entire world and forced every government on Earth to reassess everything it thought it knew. Here is the fact that most people scroll past without realizing its weight. Iran did not need to fire a single missile directly to stretch American and Israeli forces across 5 different front lines simultaneously. It used proxies, and those proxies performed beyond every strategic expectation. This was not chaos, unfolding accidentally. This was architecture, designed deliberately and patiently over years. In April 2024, something happened that had never occurred before in recorded history. Iran launched a direct military strike on Israeli soil. Over 300 drones and ballistic missiles, fired from Iranian territory in a single night. The world held its breath. Israel and its allies intercepted nearly all of them. But the message had already been delivered and received long before the last drone fell from the sky. Iran had crossed the line it had maintained for 40 years. Plausible deniability, and it crossed it, deliberately, knowingly, and without apology. Why? Because the calculation in Tehran had shifted. Iran was no longer afraid of escalation. And that shift terrified strategists in Washington far more than the missiles themselves ever could. Meanwhile, American forces stationed in Iraq and Syria were struck over 160 times in just 4 months by Iranian-backed militias. American soldiers were killed. Bases were rattled. Regional credibility was visibly shaken in front of the entire watching world. Then came the nuclear question, the one that makes every room go quiet the moment it enters the conversation. By early 2026, international inspectors reported that Iran had enriched uranium to levels approaching weapons-grade purity. Not quite a bomb, but disturbingly, uncomfortably close. The International Atomic Energy Agency described it as a deeply troubling trajectory. For Israel, this was not a political inconvenience. This was an existential threat. And yet every military option on the table came with catastrophic consequences attached to it. Consequences that nobody in Washington or Tel Aviv could confidently claim they were prepared to manage. Here is what makes this story genuinely unsettling at its core. Iran's leadership is not irrational. That is the most dangerous misconception embedded in decades of Western foreign policy thinking. They are patient, methodical, and they have studied carefully how empires overextend themselves and collapse under their own weight. Every time the United States or Israel responded militarily in Syria and Iraq against Hezbollah, Iran absorbed the blow, adapted quietly, and re-emerged stronger in a different form, in a different place. The killing of General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 was supposed to decapitate the resistance network entirely. Instead, his funeral drew millions of people into the streets, in one of the largest gatherings of human mourning the modern world had ever seen. And his successors proved just as capable, and arguably more cautious. The Mossad's targeted killing campaigns inside Iran, scientists eliminated, generals assassinated, commanders removed, disrupted the program repeatedly, but never destroyed it. Because Iran had built its systems specifically to survive decapitation. Redundant command structures, underground infrastructure buried so deep that conventional strikes could not guarantee destruction. Distributed networks, designed so that removing one node only strengthened the others. The plan to break Iran assumed that Iran would behave like a normal state, under extraordinary pressure. But Iran never agreed to be normal, and it never pretended otherwise. And yet beneath all the geopolitics and grand strategy, beneath the missile counts and the sanctions metrics and the intelligence briefings, there are people, 70 million Iranians, who wake up every morning in a country where inflation has eaten their savings hole, where young people dream of a different life and find every door closed, where protest movements full of courage and real grief have been crushed again and again without the world intervening. They are not the regime. They are also not its enemy in any meaningful sense. They are caught between a government that survives precisely by stoking external conflict and manufacturing a sense of permanent siege, and an outside world that applies pressure in ways that hurt ordinary citizens far more deeply than those who actually hold power. A nurse in Tehran earning less in real terms today than she did 5 years ago, not because of ideology, not because of any choice she made, but because of a geopolitical chess match she never asked to be part of and cannot escape. A student in Isfahan, whose university scholarship was cancelled when international connections were severed by policies designed in rooms thousands of miles away. These are the invisible casualties of a war fought in headlines and strategy rooms by people who will never feel its consequences the way these families do. History will have to reckon honestly with what pressure campaigns cost, not just in military terms, not just in strategic outcomes, but in human ones, measured in individual lives, quietly diminished. Here is what the year 2026 has revealed that 2015 simply could not have shown us. Iran is no longer isolated in the way the original architects of containment intended. It joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It deepened a 25-year strategic partnership with China worth hundreds of billions of dollars. A relationship that insulates Tehran from the financial consequences that were supposed to be unbearable. It aligned with Russia through overlapping interests in dismantling a Western-led international order that both countries feel excluded from and threatened by. The very sanctions designed to strangle Iran helped push it into the arms of the two powers best positioned to absorb it, sustain it, and benefit from the partnership. And now, for the first time in decades, the United States faces a Middle East where it cannot dictate outcomes the way it once assumed it could, where a sanctioned, isolated, economically pressured country has successfully exported its security doctrine across 5 nations, where every military option available carries a risk of regional war that nobody, not in Washington, not in Tel Aviv, not in any capital, can fully control or confidently predict. So where does this end? Nobody truly knows. And that, in itself, is the most honest answer anyone can give you in 2026. What we do know is this: the assumption that economic pain alone could redirect the course of a deeply ideological state has now been tested for more than 40 years, and the evidence, examined clearly and without wishful thinking, suggests the assumption was fundamentally flawed. The United States and Israel are not losing in a conventional military sense, but they are not winning in the way they intended, in the way they planned, or in the time frame they expected. And Iran, battered, sanctioned, mourning its own dead, its people exhausted, is still here, still expanding its reach across the region, still refusing, with a consistency that has become almost impossible to dismiss, to behave according to someone else's script, whether that is defiance or resilience, or something the world has not yet found the right word for. That question will define the next decade of global history in ways we are only beginning to understand.